Good morning. Ayin Beis. We're reviewing the conclusion of Ayin Beis, going through it all. These are the main points. We are on page 1387, I believe, on top. Yeah, 1387. So what are we learning? Remember, this whole section that began on page 1350 was the interface between divine and existence, mamayla lamata. Inyan hateirish b'chinas hamshachim mamayla lamata. That followed 550 pages approximately earlier, discussing it mamata lamayla, like he says at the bottom of the previous page, 1349. V'zeu tachlis avedet tefillah b'chinas halo mamata lamayla. Miyesh la'ayin. And that should be radiating and illuminating existence without any garments and filters. But then on page 1350, v'teira oir. And that's why it's called teira oir. The teira is a teira of light. What type of light? It's divine light. It's illuminating, fundamentally illuminating force, because it's given by God to us. Creation is created through tzimtzum, through cheshach, through darkness, concealment. The Torah is, in contrast to that, an illuminator. It comes to illuminate all the paths of life in this world. So we should know what to do, what not to do, to live the healthiest possible life, to live a life aligned with godliness. So it's essentially an amshacham amayil lamata. However, the Torah engages with existence. We learn Torah, and we integrate it. And therefore, in Torah itself, we've been learning there's three levels: Mikra, Mishnah, Talmud, which are three stages, so to speak, in the divine revelation, with Mikra being the highest, and Talmud being the most integrated, most understood. And in the process of integrating and illuminating the darkness that Talmud does, because we don't have the clarity that the Bali HaMishnah, that the sages, the Mishnah, Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi, Rabbeinu HaKodesh, and the generations before him had. So in that process, we're actually accessing even a deeper light. Well, you could say a deeper dimension of the root and source, Sheirush Mokra Chochmeh, in its essential source, as we learned at length. Now we've returned, after 22 pages of explaining the difference between Mikra, Mishnah, and Talmud, we're returning now to the comparison that he gave initially, where he began the whole discussion, that this is comparable to the moonlight, is Talmud. Luminous stone, which we'll learn soon on page 1388, next page, will be compared to Mishnah and Yetzirah. And then he's going to go back to Riyah, eyesight. That will be on page 13, I believe it's, let's see. Rather, I'm sorry, 1400 and no, sorry, my mistake. No. 1398 will be Eir Hariyah. So right now we're learning the comparison of Talmud to Bria, Talmud and Bria to Levana, and briefly, this is the summation. The Levana, the moon, is called a moir. It's called a luminary, but it's an interesting type of luminary. It is a luminary that receives from the sunlight in order for it to shine. When it shines, it is the source. So on one hand, its source is sunlight. On the other hand, it's not a mirror of the sun. It has its own radiating light. Earlier we learned either it has its own light or it transforms the sunlight into moonlight, so to speak. So in that sense, the same thing is Teira Sheba'al Peh. Teira Sheba'al Peh receives from Teira Shebiksav, from Mashpia. That's where it comes from. It's not an original. But once it does, it's illuminating darkness like moonlight does. And it's doing so with its own effort. Like the Amoraim, the Talmudic sages, through their Yegiyah, through their effort, they are illuminating to bringing clarity in a place where there's no clarity because they did not. The Mishnah was not. They don't have the clarity of Chochmah Elah from the Mishnah. So in the world of Atzilus, that's where Chochmah dominates, and that's a radiant world, a divine world. But in the world of Bria, which is called Beida Cheshach, it's a state of Cheshach initially, but comes Talmud and illuminates even in a world like that. That even when the Chochmah is Misalim, so that's what the moon does. The moon, when the sun is not shining in a night, the moon illuminates. It illuminates based on obviously receiving from the sun, but is going through the filter, going through the process of the moon. That's basically what he said on page 1386 in brief. And that's Malchus of Bria, which receives from Malchus of Atzilus and from Bina of Atzilus. So it's the state Bina is like a mosach, like a curtain that diffuses the light of Chochmah, and in turn radiates within Bina, within Bria. Okay. Now Chochmah is Momaila, and this is Momata. That's why the Levana is called Er Makabel, and that's the comparison to Talmud. This level of Er Makabel that is compared to the moon. Okay. Then he brought a few things to compare, to explain it. He brought some similar instances where you see this experience in this fashion. Let's spell them out. Well, one more thing. That reaches the Sheresh Shemakar HaChochmah. And both the moon and the Talmud, in the process of illuminating, they have to reach deeper into the source. That's why he called it Atara, Eishes Chayla, Atara's Baila, the crown. They reach into the Helam that's higher than the Gili of Chochmah. Yeah. So the first thing he brought was from the Kutta Teira Tse'ena Re'ena, that in order to see the Ena, the Atara, this crown, you have to go out. Tse'ena. Come out. Going out from where? They're going out from Atzilus into Bria, they lead us B'chinas Atara, so Tse'ena B'chinas Atzilus into the Hecholas, into the chambers of Bria. And Oz Dafke Re'ena. And then the next thing he brought was the Pri Eitz Chaim, the Dafke Shema reaches the Yichud of Abba Ve'ima. But Shema is in the world of Bria. Shema is a tefillah you say miyushav when you're sitting, like we learned earlier. Meshvei Seichem. But Dafke there, Teviya Lechem Tenufa, to reach a higher level, Yichud Abba Ve'ima. Shmei Nesra, which is higher than Shema, reaches the Yichud of Zohan Malchus. But to reach Yichud Abba Ve'ima, you need to have, in the Lashon of the Pri Eitz Chaim, Ein Bonu Koyach Le'er Abba Ve'ima, B'Yesenu B'Atzilus, Rak B'Yesenu Lamata B'Bria. In order to stimulate Abba Ve'ima, which is Chochmah and Bina of Atzilus, you need to go into Bria. So here you see again that going down brings that in order to reach a higher level, you go down to a lower level. And then the next thing he brought was the Spaklariam Ira and Spaklaria She'enim Ira. Similar idea as well. That what? That the Chazal say, Razal say, to reconcile the contradiction between in one pasuk it says, the Ere, and I will see Adnai, Ere. And another place, Lo Yoreni, you cannot see God. She explains, one is Baspaklar Me'ira, which means literally a clear glass, a radiant glass, a clear glass, and the other is an unclear glass. In some places in Chassidus, it says Baspaklar She'enim Me'ira is a spiegel, a mirror, which he does quote later here at the bottom, at the top of the next page. Bottom line is that one is clear through and through. You see the thing itself. If you say it's an unclear glass, I gave the example, it could be frosted glass, it could be something translucent, not transparent. The bottom line, it's not as clear. If you say it's a mirror, it could be clear, but you're not seeing the thing itself. You're only seeing a reflection of it. When you look through a glass, a pane of glass, you see the thing itself, which is going to be relevant to what he's going to speak about Mehusa Mitzias. I'll get to that in a moment. But before we get there, let's just explain what he says here. So even though Spaklai HaMe'ira is, of course, a much higher level than a Spaklai She'enim Me'ira, the Gemara in Yevamis actually says that Moshe Rabbeinu was the Navi. He prophesied. He had the vision like a clear glass. He saw exactly as it was. And all the other Nevi'im, they prophesied with like a Spaklai She'enim Me'ira. In other words, they didn't have quite that clarity. It was more through like a unclear glass in that expression, the Gemara. And yet, he says, nevertheless, meaning this, you see Mehusa Dover, you see the very personality, the very essence of the thing. You only see it exists, but you don't see you don't see it in its entire entity. Especially if you look at a mirror, even though a mirror is a reflection, but it's a reflection. You're not seeing the thing itself. Makol Mokim, he said, there's a yisrin, there's a quality, a value of something that the Plaklaya Animator has that a Plaklaya Meter does not have. Precisely for that very reason, because as Plaklaya Meira sees the essence of it, there's only that much you can see without being blinded. Whereas as Plaklaya Animator, because you're not seeing all of it, you're not seeing its very essence and very personality, the intensity, you can actually see higher levels. You see only an external dimension of that, only the reflection, but you can see more in this reflection. Whereas if you look straight at something, there's a limit, like he says. So to use an example of a teacher and a student, a teacher is teaching a very deep concept. The deep concept is who's capable of receiving the deep concept? Someone that's on a higher level, a higher student. If he was going to reveal that depth to the students that are not on that level, they wouldn't get the depth. But if he explains it externally, you could say like somewhat superficially, or more like just the highlights, then he could tell them things that even the other student who receives the depth would not relate to, because he understands and appreciates it more. So in other words, when you're dealing with something that's so the muhus of it, you could reveal more. However, it's going to be more external, more consanguineous, like he says. So even though it's Gili Metzias Levad, Mukol Mokim Hazem Madregas Al Yenus Yesa. And he gave another example now for this in the parentheses, like the difference between the skull, Gulgalta, and Meichis Timah. So Meichin is definitely more muhus. Meichin is intelligence. Gulgalta is only a shell, so to speak. It's only a skull. It's a encasing. And yet Gulgalta is, so the Galta is chitzenius compared to the pnimius of Meichis Timah. But nevertheless, he's a chitzenius from a higher level. Gulgalta reaches and it's rooted in a higher level. So it's an outer dimension of a higher level, with Meichim being an inner dimension of a lower level. Okay. And in Teda, all this, he says, is Gilead Mohus, but there's the different levels of this Gilead Mohus. Good. And then finally, I think, not finally, there's a few more things one more final point was that the reason for this, now he brings in Ur Chayzer. So till now, we're talking about two ways of looking at something. But now clearly he's using the mirror as an example. Because as in our context is coming through whom? That's coming through Talmud. It's coming through the students who are struggling to try to understand what it says in Mishnah. So the Mishnah would be in this comparison, or Mikra. Mikra and Mishnah would be more like a Spaklaya Hami'ira. It's very clear there. They have the clarity. But in Talmud, in the process of trying to understand deeper, in other words, to illuminate the darkness, that reveals higher levels that the Mishnah and the Mikra don't have in a revealed way. That's what he's saying now. So in other words, he says in the form of Chayzer, like a mirror. What's a mirror? A mirror is a reflection. You're not seeing it directly, you're seeing it on the rebound. Tzipui kesef, as he brings here, when you smear or spread or coat, we spoke about. These are all correct words. Silver on the back of a pane of glass, you turn a spaklaya meira into a spaklaya she'ein meira. However, you need this coating, and this coating is a form of, already, like he said before, mosach, a form of like a filter. So that's good. And that, what is it in the nimshul? In the nimshul, it means you're not seeing the muhus, you're seeing only the mitzias, the reflection, but in the process, you're able to reach deep, you can see deeper levels. Now, in the mirror, you're not going to have that example. The example doesn't work. Because in the mirror, you don't see more necessarily than you do through a glass. However, you could say that maybe a mirror actually can show you things that a glass, because you can look back. When you look at a mirror, you can see things that you look through a regular glass, you see everything behind you. But I don't want to go that far because he doesn't say that here. So I don't know if the mushal in the nimshal it works very well. That through the rebound, meaning through the rebound effect of a student who's trying to understand their teacher's ideas and bringing clarity through their effort, are able to reach deeper levels. That's where we stopped. So all of this is coming to explain this seeming paradox that when you go down, you're really going up, basically. Meaning the lower you go, the higher you reach, and the other way around. The highest levels come down in the lower levels, which comes back to tell us that Mikra Mishnah, if you talk about firepower, Giluyim, obviously they're higher than Talmud. Talmud is a lower level. But in the context of reaching more deeper etzem, reaching a deeper dimension, so not Giluyim, so Talmud, through the effort, you go back to the root and source, which like we learned about Bina. That Bina will reveal in its process of deliberating and asking questions and discovery, it will reveal things that in Chachma Gluya is only an akud, it's only a spark, only a kernel, a seed. That development will reveal more things. At the same time, it's all concentrated in Chachma, like we learned earlier. So this is all coming to explain that concept. So we'll continue now. He's going to continue with more elaboration to explain this aspeklaya me'ira, aspeklaya she'ena me'ira, and all back to what he started with the Pri Etz Chaim, that Shema is in Bria, reaches, dafka there, you can create the yichud of Abba ve'ima in Atzilus. Now this concept should not be foreign to anyone, because essentially this is what we learn all the time, that dafka neshama comes down below. It's not as high as the neshama is in Atzilus. And yet dafka down here, in this dark world, when neshama does its work, it reaches deeper levels, yafa sha'achas b'tshuva ma'asim tevim, like I mentioned, in this world, more than Olam Haba. And when you take into account Nesava Kadosh Baruch Hu, that God desired to have a dira b'tachtenim, that means only in tachtenim, in this lowest, darkest world, we create a home for God. Elyonim, you don't create a home for God. So how much Atzilus is superior to Asiya Gashmi, Chumri, this world, and it is superior because it's a divine world. But there's something that we achieve when we reach into the Etzem Dafka in this world. So in broader terms, he's going to mention it soon. This is the general concept. So Talmud in Torah manifests that idea, that when you go into darkness, machshakim, where you don't have clarity, and you work hard in finding that clarity, you're reaching deeper into the source to find that Ur. And that's essentially the concept of what we're discussing here. Okay. Unless somebody wants to ask something, we'll continue. I'm trying to go this a little quicker than usual, but the thing is, once you start stuck in the lines, sometimes you have to explain everything, but I don't want to skip this section particularly, because it's very important in the whole theme of what we're going to learn later. And it's not, so that's why I'm going through it all. Okay. So we're going to go another paragraph, 2 paragraphs, before we get to the second mashal of Evan Toiv, the luminous stone. We're still in the Talmud Levana comparison, the moonlight and the Talmud. So on top of page 1387, second line, I'll continue reading. The pages can be found at ayinbeis.com if you want to follow the text. Anyone has any questions so far? Okay, so v'chein mavur b'makom acher. The inyan, and so is it explained elsewhere. So yet the Rebbe Rashav is bringing yet another case study, if you wish, another scenario, another situation that is similar to what we're discussing here. And what does it discuss? It talks about the difference between Avram and Moshe. Be'iyam asher ba'Avram nemar hisalach lefonai. That you should walk lefonai, before me, God is saying. Uba Moshe, lefonai is from the word pnimius, before me. By Moshe it says, ksiv v'ri'isa es acherai, and you will see my back. Acherai is the back, not the front. So before he used the expression that you'll see Adnai, that I saw Adnai, or Lo Yoreini, I didn't see. But now he's using a different comparison. So l'chayra, Moshe was higher than Avram. So why by Avram it says Lefonai, Apnimius, and by Moshe it says Acherai, only the back? Who did Moshe? What is explained elsewhere? Moshe was able to see the very personality of the divine. Just to give another example from Mahusa Metzias, it'll just help understand this. I give an example often about the artist and the art. When you look at a piece of art, so clearly it teaches you about something about the artist who made this art. And if you're a good student, if you're observant and you diligent about it, you can learn things about the artist from the art that he created. But it's still not, you've never met the artist. So you can't say you know the muhus of the artist. You know the mitzias of the artist. You know he exists, but you may never have met him. You may not know so much about him. Then you meet the artist. He comes by and someone introduces you, here's the artist. So now you're seeing the artist, but it still doesn't mean you have the muhus of the artist. It means you see his existence. He's now here, present before you. But it still doesn't mean you know him well. But then talk to someone who knows the artist well. Someone who grew up with him, let's say, or has spent a lot of time with him and knows his personality. So obviously, the more someone knows someone, the more you know the muhus. We have it all in our lives. There are people you know, strangers. You meet them the first time. You can't say you know their muhus. You can say you know their mitzias. Maybe with a little conversation, you start to get to know them. But then there are people in your lives that you can say you know their muhus. I'm not saying all the muhus. You know, there are things it's hard. There's always a mystique. There's always something that eludes us. But it's very different knowing your spouse, for example, than a complete stranger. Knowing your children. Knowing close friends. So Moshe Rabbeinu essentially was the closest ever to Hashem. It says he was the only one that spoke to Hashem face to face. I know here it says back, but we'll talk about that afterwards. It says Moshe in Parshat Kisisa, which is actually relevant to these days in Elul. Moshe is on the mountain, and it says he spoke to Hashem like a person speaks to his friend. No one else you ever hear such a comparison to a friend, because they got to know each other. Now, what does it mean, got to know each other? That means Moshe knew everything about Hashem? Obviously not. Hashem is infinite and beyond. But what he knew was mehus. That's Oriyas HaMehus. Whereas the other that's why it says Aspaklaria HaMeira. He saw God like you see it through a clear pane of glass, without filters, without translucence, without the frosting, without any curtains or partitions. You saw it the way it is. However, there's a limit to that. When you're looking at Mahus, you can't see levels that are beyond you. Because like someone who's able to look at the sun. So you're able to look at the sun, but if it gets brighter than that, it can blind you because you're seeing the Mahus, you're not seeing a reflection. So Moshe's Maila was that he saw Mahus Mamish. To see the Mahus of Hashem could only be through Acherai. Because looking straight, then it says, a person you cannot see my face, you cannot see my muhus and live and be you. You could see the acherai of my muhus, and you're seeing the muhus. That's what Moshe was able to see. Whereas by Avram, we'll see in a moment about Avram. Ukamayim Razal, Kesher shel tefillin hiralei. So it says in the pasuk that we know it says, Rashi brings it, I believe, as well, that the Medrash brings Mechilta, that brings that. What does it mean that Hashem said, you'll see my back? It says Hashem passed by and he saw the kesher of tefillin on the back of his head, because Hashem wears tefillin sharash, but not the tefillin on the front of the head and the back. Now, obviously, this is all metaphorical, but he saw the kesher of tefillin. What level is that in Kabbalistic level? As he says, Malchus de Tfuna. Malchus of Tfuna, that's what it says. Tfuna is a dimension of Bina. The Tfuna, understanding. But it's Malchus of Tfuna. Shemelubish b'zeh b'chinas acharayim the Abba Bilvad. So in the Malchus of Tfuna, you have Melubish, you have manifest, you have enclosed the outer dimension of Chachma, but only the outer dimension, not the premise of Chachma. So the premise of Chachma would be seeing something, seeing the Mahus with a full intensity. That's not, if you're looking at Mahus, you can't see that. That's like trying to look at the sun. But if you're talking about seeing the achedai of that, an outer dimension of it, that yes. And that's what Moshe saw. By contrast, Avram, the ksivi salach lefonai, hu b'chinas hasoga levad. Avram didn't see it, the mahus. He understood it. He comprehended godliness. It wasn't an experience. It doesn't say very isa. It says hisalach. You'll walk before me. Not a level of riyah. So it's a level of so it doesn't say shmiyah, but it's like he's hearing about it or he's understanding it. Understanding, you can understand deeper levels because it doesn't require looking at the very face of something which can blind you. When asaga, which you're already a step away from the mahus, you're seeing only mitzias, there you could also have asaga and primis. So a person can understand levels that are higher than what they can see with their own eyes or experience firsthand. However, in this case, what's the downside is that it's only Yediyas HaMetzias, because he's Sasaga. He only knows of it, knows it exists, so he can know of levels in a way that are higher than what Moshe sees. Now, of course, Moshe also knew about these levels, but not Riyah. We're talking about Riyah now. So Moshe's talking about, if you're talking about Riyah, it's on the levels that he was able to see. When you're talking about Hasaga, understanding, you could always understand levels that are beyond you. So, for example, talk about a chassid and a rebbe. You can learn about a rebbe. What is a rebbe? And learn about him and understand and appreciate the milas of a rebbe. Then when you go in to see him, it's not quite the same thing. Now you're in his presence, you're going to have a lot of, you can be completely overwhelmed because it's one thing learning about him, so to speak, from a distance, and another is experiencing it. So the experience is a very profound one, but it's a level of acharayim, whereas the hasaga it reaches higher levels, but it's only mitzias bilvad. Okay. Bal derech chacham odef menovi. There's an expression in Chazal. Chacham, Chacham is a wise person, a sage. Novi is a prophet. So you would think a prophet is higher than a sage. Why? Because he sees the future. God reveals to him what is going to happen. A Chacham, even though it says Chacham reyes hanoiled, and he could, he can see the outcome of things, but you don't call him a Novi. And yet it says Chacham Adif Menovi. A Chacham has a Adif means is greater than a Novi, better than a Novi. Not to knock a Novi, he just has a quality that a Novi doesn't have. Why? So he explains. Because v'yadua ha'heferish b'neihem. It's known the difference between a Chacham and a Novi. The Nevuah b'chinas Gilead Mechus Mamish. Because a Novi is actually seeing it. He's not perceiving it. When a Chacham is able to predict the future, he's not seeing it because God showed him, like Chazain Yeshayo, God showed Yeshayo a vision of what's going to happen. The Chacham, because he's intelligent, can understand cause and effect and understand the consequences of behavior today will lead to something tomorrow. But it's not Gilead Amos Mamish. But Chachma Hirak Bechinas Hasogas Mitzias Levad. A Chachma is only the comprehension of the existence of it. But it's Odif. Mukol Mokim Chacham Odif Menovi. Nevertheless, what makes him greater? Because precisely because he's not seeing it, he's able to reach and comprehend higher levels. Like is discussed elsewhere at length. You may have learned this in other Maimorim where he talks sometimes that I'm trying to remember who it was. Talks about two people that someone was that I think that Rizal was able to understand that silus, but a Novi could only reach Bria because a Novi is seeing. Excuse me. Because a Novi is seeing it with his own eyes, and that's why he reaches only Bria. Whereas an Asoge, you can comprehend things that are beyond you, so to speak. Yeah. Okay. Any questions? Or
Rabbi,
let me just,
oh,
one second. Let me just one more line. V'nevuah, he b'bchinas gilim al-maila. Nevuah is a gilim al-maila. Because Hashem is the one that is giving the vision to the Navi. Navi doesn't figure it out on his own. Hashem is revealing it to him. Mashenken chachme v'asoge. Chachme v'asoge. Hu shabai de'yigiyah. That comes through effort. That comes through exertion. Umagiyah b'madreg el yeni yesed. And he reaches a higher level, which again makes it more fitting to what we're talking about Talmud and Mishnah. So if you're talking about revelation, that's Har Sinai. Mikra is the highest revelation. Mishnah is the next level. Talmud, we said, was not Ish Mipish. They had to figure it out on their own. So within that process, they're able to reach deeper levels, but only the external, not the Metzias, not Muhus, as Mishnah and Mikra is. And it's going to bring us back now to what we learned earlier, but I'll stop if anybody wants to ask anything yet.
I was going to ask Rabbi two things. One is, doesn't a Navi have to be a Chacham? I mean, that's one thing. And then the other thing is
well, let
there
me just answer that immediately.
Okay.
Even if he has to be a Chacham, but the Navi part of him is not the Chacham part of him.
I see. Okay.
You could be a wise person and not have a prophecy. Point being is that there were Chachamim that were not Nevi'im, and they were able to reach higher levels than a Navi was.
I understand.
Even if the Navi had some intelligence. The truth is, it says in the Pesukim that a Navi is sometimes called a Shaita, but a Shaita doesn't mean he's a fool. It means that he has to suspend all his intelligence in order to channel Nevuah. But that's another discussion. That's not really relevant to this so much. Maybe it is a bit, but not, okay. Go ahead, second question, yeah.
The second question is, and I understand, this all very well relates, obviously. I'm not making, I'm not adding anything to our discussion about Talmud and Mikra and Mishnah. Like my mind always wants to have see a qualitative difference. Is there or are we just, is that like a problem with the mind? Like qualitatively, is it better to be, to do it through your own avoda?
Each one has a quality that the other one can benefit from. They complement each other. Let me put it in very simple terms. I'm sure we all had classmates that were brilliant. They were just naturally gifted, good minds. And then there's some who didn't have such gifted minds, but they worked very hard. And many times when you work hard, you actually reach deeper. I remember a few people I know, very smart, but they were lazy. And the truth is, some people who worked hard actually reached deeper levels than the ones that were gifted. Now, if the ones that were gifted also put the effort in, obviously they could have gone further, but they took it for granted a bit. So which is greater, to be blessed with genius, with brilliance, or blessed with that commitment to really study hard and then work it through? The ones that worked it through were far more thorough, much more thorough. The gifted person, it's a gift, like he says, Mamaila. God blessed him or her with a good mind, so they understand. They catch things quickly. They understand in a very profound way, but there's a lack of thoroughness at times, and therefore mistakes are made. So to ask the question, which is greater? I mean, each one has something, and especially in Chassidus, we never really compare apples and oranges. You don't compare Yisachar to Zvulun. You don't compare a Kohen to a Levi to a Yisrael. God created us all with diversity. Each of us have our qualities. Some people have tremendous emotional intelligence. Other people have more intellectual intelligence. You want to learn from each other. You want to grow in all areas. But the fact of the matter is, some people are going to have blue eyes and some people are going to have brown eyes. And that's that. And what you need to do is look at what you have, your strengths, and try to maximize them and try to minimize your weaknesses and grow in the areas that you need more improvement. There are people who are very powerful Chachma people. They're very good at conceiving ideas. Others don't conceive so well, but they're excellent at developing ideas. Or very many companies, actually, the people who are like the innovators are not good at developing it. And the developers are not good at innovating. And you don't need to do both. One person doesn't need to do both. That's the Chachma Bina. So in the context of Mikra, Mishnah, Tal, Mikra, Mishnah, let's just use them here both together, are far more revelatory. God revealed, and they received. Obviously, Rabbeinu HaKadosh was brilliant. Moshe Rabbeinu was brilliant. But there was an element of Gilui that they had. Riyah, Muhus. They were given. Moshe Rabbeinu received straight from Hashem. Who else heard the Torah from Hashem directly? The Amoraim already, the Chachmei Talmud, did not hear it quite with that type of clarity. So they are more have to struggle with their effort. And in their struggle, they're able to reach deeper levels. However, it's more mitzias in contrast to Muhus. So the answer ultimately is that Mashiach comes and we join them both together. We want to have the highest levels of Muhus revealed into the lowest levels that initially is a mitzias. Because remember, once you know that it exists, then you can start growing and continue to appreciate it more and more. So it's not a static situation. He's giving two, we'll call it two models here, but both of them can grow, both the Novi and the Chacham, and they're both necessary. This is classic Chassidus. There are things that are Momayel Lamata that are given to us, and there are things that, in other words, it's like a moment of grace or inspiration from above, and there are things that we initiate and we generate, and they're both necessary, and each has a quality that the other doesn't have. In this case, he's obviously talking about the quality of the Mamata Lamaila that comes from Torah Shabbat Peh, specifically Talmud Bavli. Okay?
Very good.
I hope
Thank
that
you.
helped.
It does. Thank you very much.
Can I just inject that Chacham Adif min Navi could mean both ways. You could say Chacham is preferable to a Navi, or you could say Adif is like extraneous to a Navi. Like
That's
Odif.
not what he says here in this mimer.
I know, but I'm just saying that, like, you could, like what you're saying now, that you could, what, yes, bezeh man she'ein bezeh, you know, kind of, you
Yeah,
could
but
look at
here
it
he's
both ways.
talking, but here clearly he wants to focus on the quality of the Chacham. Yeah, in other places that may be discussed. Yeah. So now he's taking us back to what he said in the previous page, the p.1387 Chaim, that said the statement that the yichud of Chacham and Bina, Abba ve'ima, I should say, is dafka not ba'atzilus, only b'yosenu b'briya, which with all these different examples that he gave here, now we'll understand. He says, Val derech zeh mashu kosu b'p.1387 Chaim. And this is similar to what we said before in p.1387 Chaim in the previous page. That what? In order to awaken or stimulate or arouse the yichud, the unity of Chachman, of Abba ve'ima, father and mother, which is Chachman Bina and Atzilus, v'hu the sheidish hamshachim b'chinas atzmus ein sof. He's explaining yichud Abba ve'ima in its full sense means it's drawing down hamshacha from the core of ein sof. U'kameshikosa ba'abir d'v'nigdashti. In other words, it's more than just Yichud Abba ve'ima higher than Zohar Malchus. It's reaching all the way into Atzmus Ein Sof, like he says in Likutei Torah, in the beer of a Nigdashti. And this is actually brought earlier a few times in Ayin Beis. One place was on page, I have it marked here, 1236. So this is a mimer, it's a very fundamental mimer about Yichud Abba ve'ima. So it's reaching all the way to Atzmus Ein Sof. So how do you reach that yichud? That's a high yichud. And Shemoneh Esrei only reaches the yichud of Zohar Malchus, which is lower than Chachman Bina, lower than Abba ve'ima. So he's saying, based on what we just learned, that al derech zeh in p.1387 Chaim. Hu dafke b'yesenu b'briya. Is dafke as we are in Bria, not Tzilus. Why? Because in Bria, which is the lower level, Cheshach, Beirach Cheshach, the Bekeach Chayzer, because with the power of the refractive light, Mebchinas HaCheshach, dafka from darkness, of lack of clarity, where you don't have the oir, the Gilui Milmaila, Mamshichim Madregas Al Yenus Yesa. You're able to draw down higher levels. So there you have it. Shema is in Bria. Shema, so Tefillah Miyushav, not like Shemoneh Esrei, which you stand, and it's a higher level of bittul. However, because of that, you're mamshich madregas al yenis yesher, because you're actually in a lower level, and that accesses the higher levels because it's like he said before, you dias hametzias. That's why. Ukamoy came, and so too, b'bchinas hamshachim u'mayla lamata, in the transmission from the top down, b'chdei sheyiyeh hamshachim b'biyah. So this is mahala mamata lamayl. That when you're lower level, in a lower place, rather, I should say, you're able to access a higher levels, like we discussed. The same thing the other way around. Mamayl lamata. And the hamshachim mamayl lamata b'chdei sheyiyeh hamshachim b'biyah, to draw something down to a lower level in biyah. The root of the hamshacha is in a higher place. So both directions, he's explaining this. Both from the bottom up, that in the lower place you're able to access higher levels, and in order to draw down to a lower level, it needs to originate in a higher level. And both those ideas obviously are prevalent in Chassidus in many, many places. Like it says in Teireh, the Alter Rebbe, Ba'abir de Moshe Yedaber. It's a pasuk, I believe, in Shmos. So the explanation of that, the Maimer, the explanation is a beer on that Maimer Moshe Yedaber. So what does he say there? B'mashikosa be'idre rabba tlas almen de nafkin b'tikune kadma. So here he's going to bring a proof from the Teireh that something that originates from a higher level goes down to a lower level. He says like this: the Idra Rabba is a section of Zohar, Parsha Nosei. Idra Rabba means the larger group, the larger community or communion of the students of the Rashbi. So it's in Parsha Nosei. So it talks about 3 worlds that come out, that are drawn out from Tikkune Kadma. So there's the Yud Kimul Tikkune Dikna. The truth is, I probably skipped this piece, but I already started reading it. Let me just explain it. So Yud Gimel Tikkune Dikna literally means the 13 ornaments of Dikna, of the Zakan, of the beard. What is it referring to? A Kabbalistic level, it's referring to the 13 attributes of compassion. Yud Gimel Midas Harachman. That radiate actually in the month of Elul. This is what Hashem revealed to Moshe when he was on the mountain and he was begging for forgiveness for the Jewish people because of the Chet HaEgel, the sin of the golden calf. So Hashem revealed to him the 13 attributes. In Kabbalistic terminology, it's sometimes referred to Yud Gimel Tikkune Dikna. Tikkune literally means here either 13 strands of the beard. Tikkunim has a lot of meanings and names. It also means ornaments. Tikkun, of course, also means repairs. But here it's not so much repairs, it's more Tikkunim means hamshachas. So the Tikkune Kadma, he says 3 worlds come out of that. That's what it says in a cryptic fashion, in cryptic language in Idra Rabba and Zohar. Shatlas Almin, who are the 3 worlds? Hen Gimel Elmes Biyah. That's the lower worlds, not Atzilus. Bri Yitzir Asiyah. Where do they come from? From Yud Gimel Tikkune Dikna, which is in Keseh. It's higher than Atzilus. The Heim Nimshachim Tikkun Arishan Yud Gimel Tikkune Dikna. That's what the Idra Rabba is saying, the Zohar is saying. That these 3 worlds come from where? Where do they originate? From the first tikkun of the 13 tikkun dikna, meaning the highest level. For the reason we just said. Because in order to bring something down lower, the root of the hamshacha is coming from a higher level. Which sometimes in Chassidus, the example is a very simple example. If you want to shine a light to a very distant place, you need a stronger light. Simple as that. Chassidus gives the example. You're holding a torch. It has a certain amount of firepower. So it'll illuminate a certain amount of space. But if you want to reach much farther, you want someone to see that light who's right now in total darkness, you're going to have to make a much brighter light. So in other words, to reach further, you always have to always has to originate from a higher place, from a more powerful place. That's the Hamshachim Amayel Lamato. And again, in Ayin Beis, as I pointed out, the Rebbe Rashab doesn't have any limits, so he's very thorough. He brings as many examples and many ideas as possible that can confirm and affirm what we're learning. So he now brings yet another place from the Pardes. And so it's explained in what the Pardes of the Ramak, Ramoshe Koraviro, writes. Sharat Saksachas Pedek Aleph. In the gate of the subtle of Saksachas are the playthings, but they're the lights. Sometimes Saksachas is also the word Sach, refined. Chapter 1, Hevi b'shem Rav Haigon. So the Ramak brings in the name of Haigon. Rav Haigon was one of the Goenim. The Inyan Yud Gimel Midas Harachmim. In the 13 attributes we just mentioned, what are they? So the question is asked, he asked there the question, what are the 13 attributes? We know there's 10 spheres. What's 13? Where's the extra 3 come from? So there are 2 explanations given. One is that it comes from the Hamshach of the Yud Gimel Mitzarachim below into Biyah, like we just learned. Another is that it's coming from the Gimel Rishenis of in Keser, like he says, Shehin Eser Sfiris, the Gimel Reishin L'Reishin. That the Yud Gimel Mitzarachim refers to the 10 spheres, and the Gimel Reishin L'Reishin, the heads to the heads. That means the head of the Yud Sfiris is Chachma, but what's the Resh to the Reish? Keser. So in Keser, he's referring to the Gimel Reishin L'Reishin, which I think refers to as Keser, Chachma, and Bina. Is the Gimel Reish, is the 3. So it's the 10 spheres, and the way they are on the head, on the head part, which is the other 3. U'b'mokem acher, b'shar Aleph Perek Zayin, in Pardes, in another place, he brings a different interpretation. He says, Hevi Braisa de Shimon HaTzadik. So there's a Braisa from Shimon HaTzadik, another one of the Tanoim, or even before the Tanoim could be. Shimon HaTzadik, I think, was from Anshe Knesset Agdela. Yeah. I recall. There it says, what are the 13 Midas Harachimim? And Eser Sfiris v'Gimel Elmas Biyah. The second interpretation I mentioned. That's the 10 spheres, but now it's talking about Biyah. Not the Reishin. They're not 3 above the 10, but 3 below the 10. Like the Idur Rabbah. The 3 worlds that come from the 10. That come from, the 3 worlds that come from the first Tikkun. V'hainu. So how do we reconcile the 2? So it's explained, to explain the Pardes, it's explained like this, V'hainu. The B'gdei Sheti Hamshacha B'Biyah, in order to draw down into the worlds of Biyah, lower world, you need Hamshacha from a higher place. So basically, both interpretations are consistent. One is talking about the root of the Hamshacha, the 3 Reishim. The other is talking about the end, the destination of the Hamshacha, the Biyah. When Moshe was receiving the compassion from Hashem, the revelation, he wanted it to come down below to the Jews on earth who had built the golden calf. So to bring it down to that level, you have to reach to a higher level. And what are these Reishim, he says? That Achlal Ze'abchin is Gimel Rishein is the Atik. Those are the three higher spheres of Atik. What I said before, Keser, Chachma, Bina, I correct myself. Sometimes it does say that. Here he's talking about the 3 higher levels in Atik. It probably could be Keser, Chachma, Bina in Atik. So in order to bring it into Biyah, the second interpretation of Yud Gimel Midas Harachimim, it has to originate in the highest level, all the way in the Gimel Reishim of Atik. Okay. Now, again, 1, 2, at least 5, 6 other topics that Rebbe Rashab brought in order to establish and to affirm the ideas we're learning here about Talmud. But so just see all of this. Each one of them deserves its own long discussion. But I did that when we learned it the first time. So I'm not going to more elaboration, using it all just to explain this idea of Talmud, that Talmud's in Bria. So both it's rooted from the higher source, that's why it can come down. But more importantly, through the efforts below, we access the Sheirish Makar, what we learned, the Sheirish Makar of Chachma Gluya in Keser, in Ayin of Keser, Chachma Stema, or higher. But he's going to bring one more, I think, one more final example. I don't know if the word is example is the right word. Another comparable idea to make this case. So let's learn this, and then we'll stop for more questions. So every Shabbos we say, in Shachris we say, there are 4 statements. And what's the 4th one? The Tchias HaMesim.
Ein dome lecha.
Ein dome lecha, Tchias HaMesim. I see here he's only bringing the first 3. Oh no, he brings the last one too later, right. So Chassidus asked the question, what does this mean exactly? Is it just 4 synonymous terms? They obviously clearly talk about different levels. Now, but if you look at it, Ein Arech means there's no comparison, there's no erech. Ein Dema means nothing comparable. Ein Zulasecha means nothing beyond, besides you. And Efes Biltecha seems to be also nothing without you. So he's going to explain here, and it's relevant to our discussion. Briefly, I'll just say it, and then we'll read inside, that the Ein Arech of Atzmos, of the Eibishter, is Dafkin Elam Hazeh. If you really want to understand God, how God is completely beyond us, you have to go to the lowest levels. Because levels that are very revealed divine will not teach you necessarily how distant God is. It'll teach you how revealed God is. So, for example, when you look at a teacher who teaches great scholars, so you understand he must be a greater scholar than them. But if a teacher can teach little children, and with his ideas and knows how to bring it down to that level, that tells you something that teacher has. So, in other words, because he can bring it down so low, it means he has some depth that the greatest teacher may not have. So, in other words, let's learn it inside and we'll see. Okay, so he says this is V'yadua, it's known the Efes Lamayla Mebchinas Ayin. So he starts with the difference between Ein Zulasecha and Efes Biltecha. So Ayin ve'Efes is sometimes used interchangeably and sometimes used together. You say Ayin ve'Efes. Literally, Ayin means nothingness, and Efes means nothingness. But the fact is, however, there are 2 levels in bittul, 2 levels in nullification. Efes is deeper. You say 0, zilch, nada. I mean, these are all just words. But in Hebrew, ayin and Efes is a deeper bittul than ayin. You say ayin, yes, is nothingness, but Efes is even deeper. Lamayla b'chinas ayin. The ayin u b'chinas ha'er k'maishu b'chinas yitziyav is galus chus le'etzem. So one of the ways Chassidus explains it is like this. Ayin is the oir, it's already nimshach. Let's say the sunlight coming out of the sun. So we know it's completely ayin compared to the sun. The sunlight doesn't have any substance of its own. All it is a reflection of the sun. It's an expression of the sun. But it's already outside of the sun. It's not completely non-existent. There is sunlight. The sun without sunlight would not radiate, illuminate the world. So on one hand, it's ayin, but it's still yetziv as galus chuslas. Efes hu arkameshu kol ba'atzem. If you're talking about, let's say, the light as it is within the sun, there we'd call it Efes. Because there, not only is it nullified compared to the sun, it's completely non-existent because it's all completely overwhelmed by outshined, if you wish, by the essence of the sun. So it's a deeper level of bittul. Ukamation is bar li'il, as we learned this earlier. I have to find where that is. This is between ayin and Efes. So therefore, when we say angel l'sachar, you say Efes biltecha. So let's see how he explains it. Well, be'elam haba, and that's why when it comes to elam haba, shu Gan Eden. So he's interpreting here elam haba as Gan Eden. There are 2 interpretations in elam haba in general: Gan Eden and Tchias HaMesim. Here clearly it means Gan Eden because he says Tchias HaMesim in the 4th phrase, the 4th section, 4th stanza of this phrase of this prayer. So he says, so elam haba is Gan Eden. Gan Eden is the worlds of Bria, Yetzirah. So he says, Omer ve'ein zulasecha b'chinas ayin. Because in no worlds, it's a level of ayin. Ein zulasecha. U'biyameis HaMashiach, That's already the future. When Mashiach comes, that's a higher level than Gan Eden. Omer efes b'techa lefisha b'yimesa Mashiach yagili lamata. Because the Yimesa Mashiach, the Gili, the Gan Eden is a Gili Lamaila. Today, the Neshamas, after they pass, they go to Gan Eden. They're learning Torah there. But it's not Lamata. It's not in this world. Mesa Mashiach, the Gili will be Lamata. And because the Gili is lower, commotion is Bar Liel, as we learned earlier. So since it comes down Lamata to a lower level below, Muchrach, like we said earlier, something comes down lower, it has to come from a higher place. So you have to say, Muchrach liyas nimshach sheresh hagili memokim gavoy yeser. You have to say that it comes, the sheresh, the root of the transmission comes from a higher place, and therefore it's efes, comes from a deeper level than ayin. That's how he explains the difference between Ganed, Elam Haba and Yemesa Mashiach. But there's still more. You have now Ein Arech L'cha Elam Haza. So that's consistent to what we learned before. To bring it down lower, you need to go reach higher. That's why Ephes is higher than Ayin. You're going into the root, into the source, where the oir is within the Mokker. Whereas in Gan Eden, the oir could be coming from outside of the Mokker, like he said. Could be like the sunlight outside of the Mokker. The Mokker would be Atzilus, for example. He doesn't say it explicitly here. So for Gan Eden, you don't need Dafka the oir as it is in Atzilus. It's a oir in Bria and Yitzirah. Whereas to reach Mashiach, Yemesa Mashiach, you need to reach Ephes. The bitl of oir, as it's called b'moyer, which could be higher than Atzilus too. Could be the oir before the Tzimtzum. Doesn't spell it out, but basically that's the Nekuda here. What about the other expression? Mashkosav Eina Reich Lecha by Elam Haza. Elam Haza is Hinezeu L'mayla Gam B'chinas Ephes. That's even higher than Ephes. And that, how do we know this? He says, V'zeu Eimer Lecha. Eina Reich Lecha. By the other ones, you don't say that. You say Ein Zulasecha. You say Efes Biltecha. Here says Lecha B'chinas Ha'atzmis. To you. When you say something to you, it means it's not just an expression of you, it's you, the etzem. In the fourth statement, the Ein Dema Lecha. There again, Lecha is said only twice. Ein Arech Lecha Be'elam Haza, Ve'ein Dema Lecha Be'tchis HaMesim. The middle two don't say Lecha, they say either Zolasecha or Biltecha. So now, since we're talking about Atzmus now, which is even higher, because even Ephes is still a Oyer HaKol B'moyer. It's Oyer. Except it's not Oyer outside of the source, it's Oyer within the source. Now we're talking about the source itself. The power of Atzmus, where do you see the power of Atzmus? That you see Dafka in this world, in the creation of the Yesh HaNivra. So Chassidus, he doesn't explain it here, but other places earlier we learned that length. The end, especially in the end of volume 2, if you may recall, he actually talked about Ein Arech Lecha at length there. He said like this: if you want to see the power of Atzmus, you can't look in a world of Oyer. I mentioned before. Oyer reveals the divine revelation. You have to see something that God created that's completely not similar to God. Oyer is a reflector of God. So, okay. So if you see somebody, for example, create something in their own image, that's a great achievement. And that image reflects them. But imagine if someone creates something not in their own image, something completely different than themselves. So Chassidus explains the creation of the Yesh, that the creation of the Yesh reveals the power of Atzmus, because he created something that's not at all reflective of godliness. Now, with contemplation, you can come to understand. Ein dover eses asme, nothing creates itself; it had to have a creator. But there's nothing in his personality that's a revealer. Sunlight reveals the sun. Imagine suddenly from the sun emerged. This is a complete crazy hypothetical. The sun suddenly was mamshich frogs. You'd say, where is it coming from? The sun is a source of light. Light reflects the sun. Then you'd have to say the sun has something that we can't even imagine, because it's giving us something that has nothing to do with revelation of light. So the same idea here. He says, in the creation of this world that doesn't have giluyim, tachtenim, it's concealed, that reveals the ein arech of atzmus, not the giluy of atzmus, the ein arech. And the second point, and in order to create the elam hazeh, also, atzmus the ein sof. Dafka atzmus the ein sof, like we learned earlier from Ageres HaKedesh. The Ageres HaKedesh says, who can create a yesh, which means like us, that does not feel its source? And Ageres HaKedesh, Simon Chof, the Alter Rebbe, is one of the big chidushim, maybe the biggest of all. He says, a yesh does not feel a source. We don't feel we come from somewhere. Feel. Not talking about with seichel. We're self-contained entities. We don't even feel we come from our parents. Feel again. We're independent consciousness. And like he says there, we feel ein le'ila v'siba. We feel the yesh does not feel it has a cause. It's not like you see, let's say, water coming out of a water fountain. Very clear. The water senses is coming from the water fountain. We don't feel that. So he says the only one that can create that is Atzmus, because he's the only entity that has Mitziyuse Matzmuse. That ein le'ila v'siba acheres kodma le'chas v'shalom. He indeed has no cause. So he can create something to feel that it doesn't have a cause. Something that has a cause can only create something that will feel the cause. That's what he says in Ageres HaKedesh. So he doesn't quote Ageres HaKedesh right here, but what we learned earlier was basically that point. So in order for Elam Hazeh to be created, it can only come from Keach Atzmus. That's why Ein Arech Lecha, Atzmus, Latzmuscha, is Dafke Be'elam Hazeh. Ein Zulosecha, there's no one other than you. Gan Eden can reveal to, Elam Haba, and the level of Ayin. Efes Biltecha is a deeper level of the that's encompassed within the source, the That's in that's in Yemesa Mashiach, which is Amshacha below. Now he doesn't go back to Tchias HaMesim, but Tchias HaMesim, Chassidus explains, is similar, because Tchias HaMesim will be the Gili HaAtzmus in the Yesh. That's Tchias HaMesim, that the Guf. Yemesa Mashiach is not yet Tchias HaMesim. Yemesa Mashiach is Gili HaLekus in this world. That has to come from a level of Efes that's higher than Ayin, than Gan Eden. But Tchias HaMesim is going to be the Gili of the Yesh HaMiti and the Yesh HaNivra. Doesn't say that explicitly here, but that's the connection. That's why it says L'cha there too. Efes Biltecha, Ein Deime L'cha, is the Tchias HaMesim. But I'm just spelling it out just to fill in the gaps here. The cold's there, and this is now the conclusion. But all this demonstrates through the B'chdei Sheti Amshacha Lamata. This is the bottom line of all the ideas here. In order for the Amshacha to come down low, so the Kliyas Madregal Yena Yeser. You have to come from a higher level. So he's not necessarily focusing here purely on Atzmos or which level, but all these things demonstrated the same idea. That the lower it goes, the higher it's rooted. And the higher it's rooted, the lower it can go down, like we learned before. Okay. So this is a very fundamental piece. As I said, I'm sure everybody's familiar with this. It says it in many, many Maimorim. But here it's a little more, I think, expanded with many, many different applications, so to speak. Let me stop if anybody wants to ask anything. No questions? Okay. Now you could ask, why do we need all these different so-called applications of this idea to explain something that seems to be pretty clear, that through the effort in Bria of the Chachmei Talmud, through Machshakim, through the darkness, they reach a higher level. And that higher level is revealed Dafke in the lower place. That is open for a longer discussion. I don't know if I addressed it the first time we learned it, but it's a fair question what each one adds here. But I'm not going to go into that. Just pointing out that the Rebbe Rashab brings so many different scenarios here. Seems like each one adds something to the bigger picture. So that I'll leave. Everybody can struggle with that on your own and come up with your own erchezer and deeper understanding of the ideas that we're learning here. What the next paragraph will address is what exactly is this? He says this Hamshachi Yeseda, this additional, this increased transmission that comes dafka from below. What exactly, how does it manifest? And he's going to explain it in the context of, let me just see. Actually, let me rephrase a bit what I was about to say. The next paragraph is actually an amplification of what we just learned. He's going to bring the Geras HaKedesh that I just quoted at the end of the next paragraph, I see. So I believe this next paragraph is not going back to Talmud. He's continuing to explain. Now remember, the break of the paragraphs was not done by the Rebbe Rashab, done by the publisher. And I pointed out a number of times they're not always accurate, to be honest. Because the Rebbe Rashab wrote it as all one long flow. There's a few places where he marks a new paragraph. So the publisher, they tried to make it more manageable, so they broke up the paragraph. Sometimes it's very good. Here, I'm not sure if I would break this into paragraphs, because I think the Inyan Hamshacha is a direct continuation of the line before. I mean, it's a continuation regardless, but I don't know if it deserves its own new paragraph. But fine, that can be debated. So let's continue learning. But it is a continuation. I thought it was he's going back to the Talmud, and he's not. I see that. He's going back to the concept of ayin and so on. Yeah. He says like this now. The inyan hamshacha yeseda be'elam habriya. And this additional hamshacha that we have in Elam HaBriya, which is what we're learning. Talmud is in Briya. And that's the hamshacha you say, the Dafke in Briya Baruch Choshech, with the Talmudic sages are studying and learning the idea and revealing Bachshakim in the darkness through questions and answers and arguments and debates, coming to a deeper clarity. She says, Yesh Lemer, this hamshacha Yeseda, that this is the revelation of the divine ayin in the world of Briya. We'll soon understand what he means by that. So remember, he said before, ayin efes are levels of bittul. So what's the contrast to ayin? Yesh. Remember, ayin and yesh. As a matter of fact, when he began to discuss on page 1350 what Torah is, in contrast to Tefillah, he said, Torah b'chinas hamshacha ma'ayin liyesh. Tefillah is miyesh la'ayin. You're going from the yesh of Elam Haza, the ego, the personality of a person, identity, and from there you're reaching a level of bittul, of absolving yourself or suspending your identity to become part of godliness. Torah is the hamshacha from the ayin to the yesh. So now he's saying like this. So this hamshacha yeseda that comes through what? Through the aveda on a lower level. In the case of Talmud, through the struggle and the exertion of the student of the Talmudic sages trying to understand the Mishnah and the Mikra upon which it's based. So he says the liyah she'elam abriya hu hayesh harishin. Shenivra ma'ayin aliki de b'chinas malchus da'atzilus, being that Briya, remember in the structure of Elamis, it works like this. Atzilus is Elam ha'achdus, the world of unity. Iyu v'chayu echad, iyu v'gamu echad, the Eiris and Kalim, the energies and containers of Atzilus are all aligned with godliness. Briya is the first world of a Yesh. When we say Yesh, we don't mean necessarily the Yesh of Elam Haza, like arrogance or selfishness. Yesh simply means that it's not completely subsumed in divine consciousness like Atzilus. So Bria is the first place where the Yesh begins to have its own identity. It's still a divine, it still aligns itself with godliness and so on. But it's called Yesh compared to the Ayin of Atzilus. So being of the Yesh addition, which was created from what? Yesh Ma'ayin, from the Ayin Alaki. And Ayin, we learned earlier, Ayin doesn't mean nothingness. Ayin means it's two meanings. That the Yesh is completely, the Ayin is a complete mystery to the Yesh. It's not Yesh mi Yesh. When you take a piece of clay and you shape it into a pot, you take a piece of gold and shape it into an ornament, Yesh mi Yesh. You see how one thing was shaped into another. Yesh ma'ayin, you look at how did this exist and where did it come from? And you can't identify an immediate source. That's like when scientists say the Big Bang. It all started from the Big Bang. But you ask them, where did the Big Bang come from? Where did the ball of gas pre-Big Bang come from? So an honest scientist will say, I don't know that, Professor. It's like that already goes into the realm of metaphysics beyond our comprehension. I could tell you that everything I know comes from here. But where did that first step come from? That's called Yesh Ma'ayin, the leap, the paradigm shift from a state of a different reality, from one paradigm to another paradigm. So it's called Ayin because it's mysterious. Another reason it's called Ayin because the Yesh is completely bottled to it for the same reason, because it's infinitely distant. So we call it Yesh Ma'ayin. So the first Yesh is Bria, that came from the Ayin Alaki, which is from Atzilus through Malchus of Atzilus. So what? Because it's the first Yesh, so Me'esham Gili Ha'ayin, it's still close to the source. It's still an Ayin compared to Yesh, like I just said, a type of a paradigm shift. It's not commensurate to each other, but still Bria is closer to the Ayin than Yetzirah is. So there's a Gilead Ayin. However, it's still concealed. Our work in Bria to recognize godliness will reveal that Ayin. Bahare, says the Rebbe Rashab, Ha'ayin ha'mahave esayesh, shoshem b'chinas ayin v'kesem. The Ayin that creates the Yesh, it is rooted in the Ayin of Keser. Remember, Chochmah ma'ayin to Matzah, another Ayin is Keser to Chochmah. Just like Bria, compared to Atzilus, is Yesh from Ayin, Atzilus compared to higher than Atzilus is a Yesh from an Ayin. All relative. Obviously, Atzilus is a world of Elokus, so it's more Ayin than the Bria is. But relatively speaking, Chochmah compared to Keser, Chochmah ma'ayin to Matzah, so it's the Ayin of Keser. So the Ayin, he says, that creates the Yesh, it's rooted in the Ayin of Keser, Hamahava b'chinas hayesh the Chochmah, that creates the Yesh of Chochmah of Atzilus. V'hu inyan, and this is when we say, Ani Rishon v'ani Achrin. I am the first and I am the last, about Hashem. Ani, the Ani Eisius Ayin. Ani is the same letters as Ayin. So Ani Rishon is the Ayin of Keser. We learned this earlier in the beginning of volume 3. And Ani Achrin is the Ayin of Malchus, the end of Atzilus, that becomes the Ayin that creates Bria. Bottom line is the Ayin of the Achrin is rooted in the Ayin of the Rishon and Keser. Ulechein dafka b'chinas hamalchus, and that's why dafka malchus, the last of the 10 spheres, mahava yesh ma'ayin, has the power to create yesh ma'ayin. Like this is big part of Ageres HaKedesh that he's going to quote soon. That dafka where did what it took? So he brings there what has the power of vegetation to give birth. So it's not in heaven. It's not on a mountain. It's in the earth. Eretz, Malchus, has the power to create vegetation. So he says, Dafka. So the same thing in Ruchnius. Malchus is Mahav Yesh Man Shelo Yesh Koyach Zeh B'Bchinas Chochmah. Chochmah can provide the seed, but the actual birthing happens in the level of Malchus, like we learned earlier about Isha. Because the beginning is wedged in the end. The Hakeach, the B'chinas HaKeser, the ayin of Kesser, which is the original source of power of give birth, create something, birth of creation, hu b'chinas malchus dafke. Where's that ayin manifest? Ani rishon and ani achre. The ayin of Kesser and the ayin of malchus. U'kamoshn is bar le'il ba'orach, as it was explained earlier at length. Vim kain. Based on this, gila b'chinas ayin aliki, how is a gili madrega gavoy v'naila? So the gili of the ayin aliki is not a small level. So when you have a gili of that ayin, is coming from a very high level, all the way from Kesser. And he's going to continue to explain now how that works in the context of what we're learning. So dafke and bria, which is the level of Talmud, which is already a level of the yesh, we're able to access the highest level of the ayin of Kesser, which is what we learned earlier, that the Talmudic sages reached into the source of Chochmah, Ilah. Mishnah and Mikra, they both have the revelation of Chochmah Ilah. They're rooted there, but it's not revealed. The Talmud, by struggling and trying to understand what the Mishnah says, are able to access the root and source, the ayin of Kesser. That's where he's going with all of this. In the context of what we learned about that the lower, you bring it to higher, it's rooted. Any questions? Let me stop here. Any questions? I think I'm going to stop here simply because we have, a lot to digest. He's going to continue to explain this, what this means exactly. It looks also that it's somewhat of an explanation. I don't know the word avoida, but it is an application here in avoida, because he's not just talking about conceptually, he's talking about how when we contemplate on Olam Haza, on this world, and we contemplate on creation, we're able to access and understand deeper levels of the divine than when we are in the higher worlds, where there the main focus is divine revelation. So I think that's what he's going to continue to talk about now. So I'll stop here and we'll just continue tomorrow. No class tomorrow and Tuesday, my friends, because I am flying to Miami. So today's Sunday. Yeah, tomorrow, Monday and Tuesday, I'm going to be in Florida for a day, but I come back, I think, after the class. When's my flight? Tomorrow for sure I won't be here. I think Tuesday as well. Okay. But before we close the recording, any questions? I'm just checking my schedule here. Why am I so low? Yeah, flight is early. Yeah, I won't be back till 10:30. Okay, so Monday, Tuesday, tomorrow and Tuesday, no class. I'll post it, but any final thoughts, questions? Okay, so let's stop here at the bottom of 3 lines from the bottom of page 1387.